Olá, bem-vinda. Welcome everyone. Bem-vindas. Vamos fazer em inglês essa live. A Aurora já está aqui. We're gonna take this one in English for all my Brazilian followers. Aurora is here. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, thank you so much, Aurora. I'm so happy. I'm even a bit nervous, so you know.
I know, please. Happy International Women's Day. And I'm so glad that we got a chance to connect and do this together. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you. And what a date. I'm so happy that we managed to get in your busy schedule Monday, the 8th of March, International Women's Day. As you know, Aurora, I'm from Brazil, but I'm living in Sweden. I've been living here for over 8 years now. I'll soon become a Swedish citizen. So I have here amongst my followers most people from Brazil, but also some Swedes. So that's why we had this a bit in the middle of the day here in Sweden, early morning for you in New York, and lunch timings in Brazil. So we could try to get all the time zones. Aurora, I'm very happy to be here. I got a lot of messages, especially from Brazilian ladies that have been following, because apparently you have already been in a small newspaper in Brazil, like a digital one. So they have translated already your interview for New York Times. So there are some people in Brazil have been reading about you in Portuguese. So I'm very happy to know that, because I also plan to take this interview and transform it in a text in Portuguese and in Swedish. But I would like to give you the chance to present yourself, tell us a little bit who you are, a little bit of your story, so that we get to know you through your voice. So thank you again, and please.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who's joining. And once again, happy International Women's Day. So my name is Arora. I was born in India, and when I was 6 years old, I moved to Saudi Arabia with my family. And when I was 9 years old, I moved back to India. And that's where I finished my high school, middle school. And when I was 18, I moved to Canada for college. So I think just life in India, I come from a family of refugees. All four of my grandparents are refugees from Pakistan. And when they came to India, they had nothing but, of course, the clothes that they had on their back. And on my father's side, my grandparents were not educated. So it was very important for them to make sure that their kids are educated. So they had a tea shop. They sold tea and samosas. I don't know if everyone knows samosas. It's an Indian snack. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was the only working member supporting a family of seven. And he also wasn't educated, and he had a government job, so that was the saving grace in those days. And yeah, so both my grandparents made sure that my parents were educated. They became physicians, and I think life in India was very comforting for me in terms of, like, I mean, I loved going to family weekly dinners, and like, just, we're a very close-knit family. So when I moved to Canada for college, it was a totally different lifestyle. Like, I remember my first day in Canada, everyone was speaking in English, and they were introducing each other as saying, "Hey." And I was like, why are they calling each other grass? Like, does this mean we need to call professors trees? Like, that was like 2005, and I graduated college. I ended up joining the audit profession, and living my own life and my own goals. So suddenly UN came along, where I was asked to join the current Secretary General in being part of the financial reforms of the UN. And I think when I joined the UN, I of course had no desire, ambition, or intent to like seek the top position. I think I was just happy and thrilled to be part of the UN. But my decision to run for Secretary General was influenced by what I learned while working here. So in a few weeks of being here, I got hit by a cab.
Oh my
So
God.
so I was leaving work late at midnight, and it was right outside the UN, and I got hit by a cab. I was taken into the ER, and I was in the ER for 8 hours. like, I had a broken knee, and there was bruising and bleeding on my body, and like internally I didn't know the extent of damage. And I think in those 8 hours, I thought to myself, wow, if I had died today, what would my obituary read? It'd be like, Arora was like always played it safe, didn't really try to make a big difference in the lives of others. And like, just that regret of having been a taker all my life, like, taken from my grandparents, my parents, community, and women at large. Like all the freedoms that we enjoy, all the privileges that we enjoy today are sacrifices of so many women. So many women that came before us. So in that moment and those conversations that I was having in my head with God, and I was like, God, please help me get through this, and I promise I'll dedicate my life to making a difference. And of course, like, thankfully I had it, I was able to recover through it. But then, so God kept his promise and I kept mine. So since then, like, 2017, I've been working to try to make UN function better. And at that time, I knew that it wasn't functioning. I didn't know functioning properly. I didn't know the extent. So for 2 years, I worked internally on UN reforms, on trying to reform. And after 2 years, I wasn't able to reform. It was more like a reshuffle. And my colleagues at the UN were telling me, see, we told you, there's a reason why we've had 9 secretary generals and 8 reforms.
Okay.
And I think that's when I realized that I would have to do something different to change the system. So
you were an auditor to the Secretariat?
Yes, yes, on the financial reforms team, yeah. So I think,
wow.
And then what in between those years, I was in Uganda on a field mission. And when I was there, I saw a child eating mud on the street. Like, she was by herself. She was by the gas station. She was wearing a torn dress and just eating mud. And there wasn't any adult around. And I was just so heartbroken and almost traumatized when I saw that, because it's just a painful image to see. And at that time, all I could do was give her food and cash, but I couldn't really do much. So when I came back to New York, I asked one of our senior executives, like, why is it that, a child is eating mud? And this is what he said, mud is good for children. It has iron.
Oh my God. And this was a UN officer. Okay.
Yes, UN. And that's when I knew, like, that we cannot trust this leadership to lead the way. We need a new kind of thinking. We need a new way of doing things. And I think for me, that's when the journey of running for this position started.
Thank you. Arora, there are so many things that I love about you. One of them that I can really see myself is that you were a bit of an outsider. I mean, you were born in India, then you had an international life. You lived with your parents in Saudi Arabia for a while, right? And then you moved to Canada, you got the citizenship, and then you came to the UN. So, but you didn't have the right, let's say, the right education. You didn't study political science and, top league university. So you had the wrong education, the wrong gender, but still you were taking the lead and you were so brave to do that. But you explained that how you end up at the UN, but it wasn't really for idealism. It's not that you really wanted to work for the United Nations, that has been your dream, that you want to change the world. How did you end up there? And you told us like when the shift, but why the UN? It was just a job for Arora then, and then it became kind of your mission that at this point that you are in your career right now. But back in time, why the UN? Why you end up there?
So I think it's very interesting, because you're right. I was living my life in Canada as a professional and doing my part, and UN wasn't directly on my radar, like you said. I think an opportunity presented itself, that the Secretary General is looking for someone who's a finance expert to lead the reforms of the UN, and to contribute to it. And I then got the job. So I think for me, I was just so thrilled to be part of an institution, because UN presents itself as like a castle on the hill. It's a very elite institution, and it's almost like a privilege to be invited.
Yeah.
Privileged to be invited to be part of that. So I was of course like quite taken aback and so looking forward to it. And like I said, so I think when I joined, I had this whole sense of idealism, right? Because I only knew UN through the media and the Google searches, which of course wasn't like entirely like, I mean, of course there's enough criticism out there for them, but for me it was like, wow, I've been invited to the party exclusive club. So when I joined, in a few weeks of being here, I figured out that the organization that was meant to do great things and created for noble purpose wasn't really living up to its potential. And I think even in those initial moments, like I vividly recall the current Secretary General being selected. Like, you know, his first day in office, I recall that moment clearly. So like, you know, every time a new Secretary General comes, they greet the staff, and then they go into their office. So I think it was January 2nd, 2017. He was supposed to greet the staff at 9:15 a.m. and then go into his office. So of course I was there at 9 a.m. waiting to, like, you know, to see him. And I was like, because I was there 15 minutes ahead, I had a good spot to get a good view of him. And as soon as he came, it's interesting, he came, and his entourage came after him. But then as soon as he got on the podium, these series of men just came and like just stood in front of all of us. This leadership team of the UN, like they just, like, you know, I mean, first of all, they didn't even come on time. And then you come, and then you just come stand in front of all the staff. And I was like, what? And I think I was so taken aback, like that coming from the private sector was like one of the most shocking, like it was, especially because I had just been at the UN 1 week at that time. I was like, wow, because in private sector where I was, leaders know that their biggest asset are people.
Yeah.
Are employees of the UN, and those employees, and it's their job to, like, you know, bring the best out of them, take care of them. So usually leaders stand at the back in meetings and like are almost like looking after staff, guarding them. Here it's like, wow, you just cut right through them, and like, you know. So I think that was quite interesting. Sorry, I was just reading some of the comments.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was very interesting. And I asked a lot of colleagues, I'm like, wait, did you see that? They're like, what? So like it's a normal culture there for hierarchy to persist and stuff. So yeah, that's how it happened. And I think then the accident is when I realized, wow, I cannot waste my life. Like, I'm so blessed to be working at the UN. I can make a huge difference. And that's when I just, that became my focus.
Okay, so let's shift now to this very brave decision of yours. If I understood it right, you have submit a letter to the President of the General Assembly with your candidacy, but I just checked this morning, a few hours ago, at the UN website, and António Guterres, who speaks my language. I'm also a Portuguese citizen. My father is from Portugal, so I'm Brazilian Portuguese. He is the only candidate, still like the official candidate at the UN website, because as far as I know, you have to have a country or a member state supporting your candidacy. How do you think about fixing this little question for your candidacy?
I think it's interesting that if you, like a lot of professors who guided me through this process have said that the rule of Security Council does say you have to engage with all candidates, self-presented or otherwise. And I think it just speaks to the extent of lack of transparency, not honoring a fair system, that that the website still doesn't recognize me as a candidate. But I also haven't received any response. So I wouldn't say that that it's a decision, like they're discussing. So the process is that the next step that I will be engaging with the member states to discuss my candidacy. Like, that is the process. That's what the book says.
Okay.
And that's what the President of the General Assembly has committed to ensuring. So I think what's at test and display is not really my candidacy. It's more UN honoring its own values.
Yeah.
Of fairness, transparency, equality. They preach gender equality, youth equality to everyone, but do they practice it in their own walls? Because I know, like I said, in the working method, Security Council should engage with all candidates presented, but they haven't done that. So I think UN is being watched by the world, and because it's just been a week, so I think it's too premature to conclude anything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like, in due course, I'll get a response from the President of the General Assembly.
And how do you feel about the prerequisite for this job? I have it written here, but they say that the candidate should possess proven leadership, manager abilities, experience with international relations, strong diplomatic communications, and multilingual skills. Do you think you fit, you have the prerequisite? And if you don't, do you still feel engaged to present your candidacy?
I definitely feel I have the prerequisites. And I think if you read the charter clearly says that the Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer of the United Nations. So I think there's a geniusness in our founders. They knew that they would be making good decisions, but they needed someone to be able to implement those decisions, which is why the role of Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer. And as someone with finance expertise and auditor, like one of the biggest responsibility is to ensure that we get value for money for all the taxpayer dollars that we get, and to fulfill our objectives. Like currently, for every dollar the UN receives, only 30 cents is used for the cause, which is why we haven't been able to achieve our results. So I definitely have those managerial abilities. I am multilingual. I speak Hindi, English, and Punjabi. And I think what I bring to the table are these fresh ideas and new ideas. Like, I mean, for far too long, we haven't challenged the status quo. And we need now to start with a clean and fresh slate, someone who can bring an inclusive approach, a new approach of doing things. And I think my platform is all about doing things differently and also engaging with the youth. Half of the world is under 30, and we haven't meaningfully engaged with them. We only ask them to be part of donation or advocacy campaigns, not really through contributing in leadership roles or in decision making. So I think that is something that I bring to the table, and a candidacy like this will ensure it paves the way for other young people to get involved.
Absolutely. We have here in Sweden, you probably know Greta Thunberg, but when I see the way people treat her, well, here in Sweden, she has a lot of respect. She has been involved. She was the chief editor for the main newspaper for an entire day. And she's very respected in general by Swedish society. But when I've seen her in the UN, it's very patronizing, like, oh, you little girl. So that's how I feel that, as you said, like the main leaders, they treat you, they like them, but they don't really want them to take too much space. So it's I think that's what you mean, that it's really give the space that you've deserved, not only like, yeah, come here, let's take a picture together just to show like that I support you, but then, okay, excuse me, now we have this little club. But it's also how we see the UN, that it's like a little club, as you said, like very elite, mainly white men, and then some women of color, some youth are invited to take some pictures and maybe hold some speech, and then bye. Like they're not really involved. How do you see that?
I agree with you, and I think what's at stake in this election is the future of the UN and the idea and ideals we were created for. Like after COVID, we want UN to be relevant to the world. We want a UN that's inclusive and understands that young people are the present and the future of world. And I think to also realize that we have to be people-centric in our solutions. Like, after World War II, this is the highest number of displaced people we've ever had, 85 million. These people have no home and no hope of finding one. Like, recall when we were in COVID lockdown, like I know things were different in Sweden, but that lockdown was a really bad feeling, because you don't know if you can come out of it or what the end game would be. But deep down, all of us knew that there would be an end in sight. Because we're all in this, of course the vaccine would come. And now the vaccine is coming. But being a refugee, they've been, half of those refugees have been in refugee camps for more than 10 years. And there's no end in sight. So we really need a UN that caters to the most vulnerable and doesn't leave them behind. These are people who are not voters in any country. These are people who don't have social media to tell their story. So it's UN's ethical and moral obligation to be there for them. And when it comes to development, youth unemployment is a huge issue all over the world, no matter the country. And I think one way to handle that is to make sure that we give the tools for economic empowerment, which is education and technology, to every person in the world, so they can seek opportunities for themselves, grow themselves, expand their horizons beyond the traditional ways of finding jobs. And currently only half of the world has access to internet. And we've then made all these accomplishments. If everyone had it, we probably would be living on Pluto by now. So, so that is what the promise of UN holds, a new UN that is absolutely inclusive and values the ideals of equality. Like, what's the point of using equality as buzzwords in your speeches when you're not giving a female candidate a chance, a young person a chance? So I think there's a lot at stake in this election. And the world is watching the UN, and I hope they pass the test because of the narrative it'll send, that you only preach and not practice.
But how do you see the fact that the UN is just a forum for 193 member states, that at the end, the Secretary General is a quite representative figure that sometimes doesn't have much power, but just to implement the resolutions of the General Assembly and mostly the Security Council. So how do you see that you could make changes if there's a change in the structure of the UN, starting by its Security Council that doesn't really reflect the world of today, but it reflects a world of 75 years ago. So do you fight for a refurbishment of the Security Council and the main structures of the organization so we could function better?
So I think there's something you said while you were saying the role of Secretary General is to just implement. I mean, that's not a just. That is the job. There are enough there are 193 members who keep each other in check when passing resolution. You don't just have one country with veto power, you have 5 countries with veto power. So they do balance each other. And this is the structure of the UN, that decision making is member states and they all balance each other. What's lacking is this implementation that affects the lives of people every day. And because we're not part of those pain that they hear and we don't hear about it, we call it as just implementation. But that is what would make a difference in the lives of people. That would what make UN relevant to the people and not just an academic exercise. So I do think that role should not be diminished. And over the last 75 years and all the Secretary General, I mean, Kofi Annan did take this role very seriously as the Chief Administrative Officer. He made significant strides in ensuring the organization is relevant and able to live up to his promise. Dag Hammarskjöld did that too. So I think there's a lot that can be done in the purview of what's within the Secretary General to make a difference in the lives of people.
Oh, very interesting what you said. So it's a lot about the personality of the SG also, and his or her attitude, because it can be a bit just like a representative or a spokesperson for the Security Council or the member state, but can be also someone who has a bit more of strength and personality that go forward and really go behind the scenes and get involved in the diplomatic talks and maybe play a bit more active role, you would say. That's would have been the difference.
I think there are 2 UNs. One is the UN that makes a decision. There is a UN that implements the decision, and the role of the Secretary General is to implement. He has 100% purview on that, 100% with no interference on that component. And that is lagging behind because the media doesn't cover it. That's not as interesting. That is not something we talk about, because the only party who know about that are the employees of the UN and those that are getting services. So that's not a dynamic we discuss in academia. So I think that role should not be diminished, because we have to go back and remember when our founders were creating UN Charter from League of Nations, there's a reason why they called it Chief Administrative Officer. There was a lot of thought that went behind it. So I think that role should not be diminished. At the same time, we have to understand that Secretary General does provide a platform, like you said yourself, for all the member states to make decisions. And I've sat in those meetings that I can tell you the member states are more than capable of making their decisions. They have very good synergies, regional blocks, and discussion points. That process is very well functioning. It's the implementation that I think really needs to step up to show results.
That's very interesting to hear. We reached like the first 30 minutes of this conversation, so I just want to encourage people, if they have any questions to Arora, that's the moment to post them. You can do it in the comments, or you can send through this box with the interrogation question mark here, so then we can read it. If you don't feel comfortable doing it in English, you can send it in Swedish or in Portuguese, and I translate it to her. But Aurora, let's suppose that you get the job. What would be the first day, like your first day in the office? What would you do?
I think my first day in the office is I would so want to just express my great thanks to all the employees of the UN. Like, you know, for any leader to be able to implement, to be able to lead and to be able to do their job, they need the support of all the people who work with them. And I think employees of the UN are just the most phenomenal employees of the UN, and sometimes they haven't been given their due credit. So I think the first thing I'd want to do is to just give them their due credit and let them know that this new UN is totally different. It empowers its employees and it gives you the tools and ability to do things differently, to do things creatively. I think that would just be like a first conversation I would have with all the employees to create that environment, because this is not a solitary job. Everyone has to be on board to get it. In terms of policy decision and implementation, I hope by that time COVID is resolved in all the countries and not just few. Like, you know, we've vaccinated everyone, and there's and we've handled through COVAX all the issues. If that's taken care of, then I think the first address would be refugee and the migration crisis, because this is a very complex crisis where most of the time when these people become refugees, they go into their neighboring countries, and these neighboring countries are usually also middle-income countries that we need to support them. So I think the policy, that would be my first.
Perfect. We do have two questions here. I think you kind of have already answered them, but have you always dreamed or have the desire to achieve this position you're aiming for? And then have you seen how do you see the fact that UN has just turned into a mechanism of few developed countries to impose their will on developing ones? And there's the third one here. What made her wanted to be in UN? Well, she has answered that in the beginning of the interview. What changed around her fact entering the UN? What is the biggest advice for women who want to work at international organizations? That's a good one, Aurora.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great one. So I think my advice for women who want to work in international organizations is to seek out, to relentlessly apply for all jobs. Like, I know it sounds very cliche, but at the UN, it sometimes takes applying for a lot of jobs to actually get the jobs. Of course, networking helps, and I think one thing that that people don't realize is international organizations are not just UN entities. There's so many others. So just expand your horizons in that, and also field work is very advantageous. So any international organization field work is extremely helpful. But most of the time it's applying relentlessly that really helps.
Perfect. There's one more here. How has working at the UN changed you in a personal aspect?
So I think it's my accident that really changed me from a personal aspect, that shift my gears from being more self-centered to selfless, to giving more, seeing how I can make a big difference, and to not give up on that at all. So that was the big shift. And I think since then, UN has been that place where I know I've been able to make a difference. And so in terms of change, like, I'm such a believer in the UN and multilateralism. Like, I know it has a place in the world and a really important role to play. It just has to deliver on its outcome and its results. So I'm absolutely looking forward to being part of that new UN where it's more people focused, have more young involved, and it's not a castle on the hill, it's everyone's house.
Exactly. That's what I love about you, what we've been saying, Arora, in different newspaper and videos that I've seen about you, that you were strong believers, not that you were against the UN or that you think the UN doesn't really work, but you see the potential and you want to be the change. And then with this comment, I also ask you, how can we help you? From my followers, people from Brazil, people from Sweden who believe in you, who believes in this change, that we need this change in this new area, you know, this post-pandemic world, that we need a different approach. How can we support you?
So thank you so much for even having this conversation so we can share the message with more people. So I think this election for Secretary General is not public, but on our website, we are allowing people to be part of the solution. So our website is unowunow.org. So if you go on the website, you can vote, and a vote from you means an email will go to the ambassador of your country saying that you support change and you believe in a new UN and a UN that fulfill its promise to the world. And I'm confident that your followers are from Brazil, Sweden, and all over the world. Like, their governments will listen to the people. So I think that would be my ask to please go vote, spread the word about voting, because it's for far too long we've accepted things as they are, and we really need to change status quo, because UN is our inheritance. We are the generation who will inherit all these things. So why are we not being part of the solution to trying to make it work? So I think together we can absolutely make it work.
Perfect. So if we go to the website and then if we sign up, or then this email goes, if I'm from Brazil, then goes direct to the mission of Brazil to the UN. That's what you mean?
Absolutely. So as soon as you go on our website, there's something called vote.
Okay. And then that's where, oh, perfect. So then I'll just make sure that I explain this in Portuguese in my stories, so then my fellow Brazilians can also do that. Yes. And there's another question here that I think is very interesting. Who's your biggest inspiration?
I have to say, actually, my biggest inspiration is of course, like, my family, my grandparents and mother. But I have to say, Anne-Corinne Frederick, like, she is the co-founder of the campaign with me. She's my campaign manager, and we've worked together on this for 2 years. So I have to say that, like, we've come through this journey, that she is a source of inspiration to me. Like, I like the late nights that we've put into it, the hard work into every detail. So I think just having someone so inspirational, determined to make things work is an inspiration to me. So yeah, Anne-Corinne Frederick.
Perfect. I have a question from Fernanda, who has lived in India. She's from Brazil. I myself, I also have been in India.
I have an event soon. I thought our IG was still 10:30.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, because now that we had a lot of a lot of questions. Sorry, I thought we would have 1 hour. That's why I'm a bit very relaxed. No problem. But well, I can just take notes of all these questions here, but I just want to mention that Fernanda has lived in India, and she's from Brazil, so she's
hi, Fernanda.
She's very happy to be here. Okay, Arora, so I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, but I'm just want to thank you so much for being here, for giving us this 30 minutes. So Fernanda is saying, no worries, thank you. We can take this later. And I want to publicly say that you have my fullest support, and I'm sure that my Brazilian followers that have been following us here are going to support you as well. And I really, really hope that you have the chance to present your candidacy officially to the member states, and I'm sure you're going to do it great. But first of all, I want to thank you for taking this leadership to really doing it, because I'm sure that you're going to inspire a lot of young women in the world, and also it's a wake-up call for change and for member states to present more candidates, because we don't want to judge Guterres, but it's good that he has some challenges or challenging candidates, so that it can be more transparent and open and democratic if he has someone challenging his second term. It shouldn't be just taken for granted. So I think this is also what you meant with your action, that he has to be challenged. More candidates have to step in and really present their candidacy, and that's also what I expect from member states, that they bring especially women candidates together with you. We have other pool of candidates that can really fight for this position, the most important and the most difficult job in the world.
Thank you once again for having me, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. Like, all women in the world are so inspiring, so powerful. So I'm glad that I shared this experience of being a woman with them. So thank you so very much for having me.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful Women's Day. And every day, in fact, should be Women's Day. So please take care of yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Obrigada.